Hello everyone and welcome to my music channel. Today we'll be discussing some music theory, be playing some guitar, we'll be applying some theory to guitar, all that fun stuff. Recently we've been talking about chord principles and diatonic notes and chord substitutions and what all that means. Be applying theory to guitar. And the specific topic that we'll be covering today is the definition of diatonic. Have you heard the word diatonic? This should be, one of the most common words in every musician's vocabulary. And, a lot of people, if you haven't gone to school for music, you don't know what this is. People just don't use that word and start throwing it around local musicians, and they're like, okay, nerd, right? It's like, no, it's just a diatonic note just means a right note. It means one of the 7 notes that are in key of which you are playing. There are 12 notes total. We all know this, right? We have 12 notes total, and we have 7 notes in every key. Do we know our major keys? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Back to 1. So, those are the diatonic notes. Those are the notes that make up the chords that are in our key. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Back to 1, right? Back to 1. And so all of those notes are diatonic, right? So if we know that, we can deduce a few things, right? So I like to talk about chord principles. I learned this from Ted Green. You should look into him. True genius when it comes to music and guitar. And anyway, substitution principles. The first one, the main one, that you can put any extension on any chord as long as you don't change the root or alter the chord, meaning flat or sharp any of the notes in the chord. And we know this based on the fact that, we know what a diatonic note is. And so if we know that extensions, right, that chords are made up of diatonic notes, we know how to build our chords. A chord is every other note in a scale, right? That's how we build our chords, right? Every other diatonic note. We just assume that we're referring to diatonic notes when we say notes in a scale. But when things get complicated, you're playing outside notes. This is starting to get to be kind of a popular thing that, people talk about that are getting into jazz and all that stuff. And I'll tell you what, wrong notes, there are no wrong notes. If you know how to use the non-diatonic notes, the outside notes, then believe me, those ones are super juicy. Those are the juiciest. Those are the ones that are going to make people's heads turn. Those are going to be the ones that are going to make you sound unique and like something that nobody, that everybody else doesn't know. Believe me, those are the good ones. But we start, with the diatonic notes. Yes, and so we have C. Let's take C major, the key of C major. Right? We have our diatonic notes. Right? And we know that C major is relative to A minor. all keys have relative majors and minors, and this is because they share the same notes. They have exactly the same diatonic notes. They just start from different places. They start from different notes in that group of notes. You can think of a key as a circle, and the name of the key determines where you start on that circle, right? But C major is the same circle, actually, right, as A minor, same notes. So you can do a lot of stuff based on this thinking, and I mean, you can make some cool sounding stuff without even playing any outside notes, without changing any keys or anything. You can still make the music interesting by changing the center, right? You're changing the key even though you're not changing any notes. You might say, if you're not changing any notes, how do you change the key? It's because you're implying what the tonic chord is, what the home chord is, right? So, right? Right? We're implying that right now A minor is home, right? So let's go C major, right? We're in C major. Right? Doesn't even really, to me, sound like we've changed keys yet, because we really haven't, right? Recently we've been talking about chord principles and diatonic notes and chord substitutions and what all that means. Let's dive in at the substitutions part of that. Substitutions are a popular thing in the music world, especially people that become interested in learning about music, or early students in music, and so substitutions seem like this mysterious and complicated thing. They can be, but really for the most part, it all stems from some pretty basic concepts. A lot of the time when people are talking about substitutions, they are not actually talking about substitutions. They are talking about chord additions or subtractions even. And so a lot of times you can add chords add chords into a song, right? But you're not replacing a chord. Excuse me. You are replacing, I guess technically you're replacing half of the time of an allotted chord. If you want to get super technical, you can think about it, but really it's an addition. So really when you think of a substitution, you should be thinking of it as that it could be an addition, a subtraction, or a change in the existing chord to a different chord, an actual substitution. So some examples of substitutions, are homonyms. And if you know what a synonym in the English language and a homonym is, you'll understand the concept, because just like a word is spelled, right? A chord is spelled with notes. And those notes are, in fact, represented by letters, just like words. So a homonym, right, is a chord that has the same not the same spelling, but contains the same notes, right? So a B, a B minor, in fact, a B minor 7 has the exact same notes as a D, a D major 6. Hear how those notes, they just are in a different order, right? You could combine, because they are, in fact, the same notes, played differently. And they're called two different things. One's a minor chord. The other is a major. They're, in fact, the companion minor and major. We've talked about companion minor and majors, and these are exactly the same notes, and that's because the keys that they come from are, contain exactly the same notes. And so if you know that, right, and you have a song with a B minor in it, B minor blues, right? Anytime you play that B minor, now we're up to the E minor, right? But I'm playing it as a G major 6. But on the chart it says E minor, the imaginary chart. And so you can get to some interesting sounds that you wouldn't otherwise get to if you know these things. Right? So what could we play? Right? Those have exactly the same notes. That's one kind of substitution, right? Is the homonym. But instead of changing the root, right? Even though we're changing the root, it's not like we're taking the root out of it. Does that make sense? But if we want to add some different colors into that, we have to change some notes. So we have a B minor 7. We want to add some color to that, right? Let's make it a B minor 6. Hear how that adds some nice some real nice color into there. That's one of my favorite chords, actually. It's the minor 6 drop 2 voicing. Since we know G, right? The actual homonym, the exact notes, would be a G something, right? It depends on where we start. But we have a B minor 7, then it's a G6. But all we need to know is that it's a B minor. That's all we need to know. We can make it a B minor 6 that way. Same chord. But since we know that G is the relative major, we can actually use any kind of G major, right? If you really think about it, you can use any kind of G major, and you are adding different colors into the mix depending which kind of G major you use, right? I'm sorry, D. In the case of B minor, the relative major is D major. I'm sorry, not G major. So we can use any kind of D major if we know that, right? Right? If we know any enclosures, right? The same enclosure works for the minor in the relative major of that minor, because anything that relates to those two chords, either chord in that companion pair, can be applied to it. You can do some really interesting stuff just by utilizing these really simple concepts. Thanks for joining me. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you on the next one.